You pack your bags for a beach vacation. You check your flight tracker on your tiny tracking glowing rectangle. You stress about your luggage being 3 pounds over the limit because you packed extra socks you will never wear. Why do you do this? You do this because crossing a large body of water today involves tiny bags of stale peanuts and a massive steel tube flying through the upper atmosphere. But 50,000 years ago, your ancestors looked at the terrifying, endless blue horizon of the open ocean and made a radically different choice. They did not have radar. They did not have life vests. They possessed absolutely no understanding of what lay beyond the massive breaking waves except the certainty that everything in their immediate vicinity was trying to eat them. How did they actually manage to cross a deep ocean trench without dying? The answer is far stranger than a simple accidental drift on some floating logs. You look at a modern map. You see islands neatly scattered across the blue paint. You assume these islands were easily reached by a few desperate cavemen grabbing onto a tree trunk during a bad storm. This is the classic accidental rafting theory that your high school history books love to throw at you. It suggests our ancestors were complete idiots who stumbled into geographic breakthroughs by sheer dumb luck. But the ocean does not care about your luck. The open ocean is an active, swirling death machine designed to dehydrate you and feed your remains to sharks. If you throw a random stickman on a log off the coast of Africa, he does not magically land in Australia. He becomes fish food within 48 hours. Did your ancestors know this? They absolutely knew this. Your ancient relatives were not mindless cartoon characters bumping into things until they accidentally discovered a new continent. Dr. Sue O'Connor analyzed fish bones in East Timor and discovered something completely unexpected about early human diets. Your ancestors were catching deep-sea tuna over 40,000 years ago. Tuna do not hang out near the shore, waiting for a primitive fishing line. They live out in the deep, treacherous open water where the waves can easily flip a fragile vessel. To catch them, you need a boat that can survive the open sea. You also need a crew that understands how to navigate without landmarks. How do you learn to build a deep-sea fishing vessel when your current cutting-edge technology is a sharp rock tied to a stick? You do it through thousands of years of painful trial and error. Your ancestors had to invent seafaring from absolute scratch. They looked at bamboo stalks growing near the coast and realized something fascinating. Bamboo is hollow, incredibly buoyant, and holds together remarkably well when lashed with primitive vines. If you tie enough of these stalks together, you create a stable platform that floats on top of the water. It is not an elegant luxury yacht. It does not have a swim-up bar or a nice little canopy to shield your fragile skin from the blinding sun. It is a bumpy, waterlogged raft that sits inches above the predatory ocean. Would you risk your life on a pile of grass, tied together by a guy who doesn't even know what soap is? Your ancestors did exactly that. They piled their families onto these shaky bamboo platforms and paddled straight into the unknown. Dr. Thomas Sutikna led excavations in Indonesia that completely upended our understanding of how early human species moved across the globe. He helped discover the remains of Homo floresiensis, the famous ancient hobbit humans who lived on an isolated island. To get to that island, their ancestors had to cross one of the deepest oceanic trenches in the entire world. This water barrier is known as the Wallace Line. It is a powerful oceanic trench where currents run so fast they act like an invisible brick wall. Even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age, this deep water channel never dried up. How did a primitive human species with a brain the size of a grapefruit cross a treacherous marine barrier that stopped most land animals dead in their tracks? They did it because they were far more organized than we give them credit for. You cannot cross a major ocean trench by accident with just one person. A single lonely stickman floating to an island does not start a new civilization. He just sits on the beach, gets a terrible sunburn, and dies of extreme loneliness. To successfully colonize a brand new world, you need a viable breeding population. You need men, women, children, and enough supplies to survive the journey. Alan Cooper, a prominent evolutionary biologist, analyzed ancient DNA lineages to trace these massive migrations. The data suggests that the initial settlement of places like Australia was not a random fluke. It was a planned, coordinated maritime expedition involving hundreds of people traveling across the sea at the exact same time. Can you imagine organizing a massive family road trip across an open ocean when your only form of communication is pointing and grunting? You sit in your air-conditioned room and complain when your food delivery is 5 minutes late. Your ancestors sat on a wet piece of bamboo for weeks while the salt water slowly dissolved their skin. They had to store fresh water in hollowed-out gourds or thick stalks of bamboo. If a storm hit them, their water containers would wash overboard immediately. If the wind died down, they would bake alive under a merciless tropical sun. They did not have a compass to tell them which way was north. They had to read the subtle changes in the color of the water to detect hidden land. They watched the flight paths of specific birds that traveled out to sea to hunt. If a bird flew past with a fish in its beak, it meant land was nearby. Why did they keep pushing forward into the empty blue void. They kept going because human beings are biologically incapable of staying still. We are the only primate species that looks at a terrifying, lethal obstacle and thinks it looks like a fun weekend project. Every other animal looks at the ocean and turns around to find a nice tree to climb. Your ancestors looked at the ocean and decided to conquer it with grass and sheer stubbornness. They used the stars to guide their paths at night. They memorized the rhythmic patterns of the ocean swells to detect islands hidden over the horizon. When they finally hit land, they didn't stop to rest. They built bigger rafts and looked for the next horizon. Consider the absolute logistical nightmare of this endeavor. You lose your mind if your phone battery drops below 20% while you are sitting safely on a plush couch. Your ancestors were stepping onto a bundle of logs with absolutely no guarantee that land even existed on the other side of the planet. They were relying entirely on the behavior of clouds, the dampness of the wind, and the faint smell of vegetation carried across hundreds of miles of open salt water. If they miscalculated by even a single degree, they would drift aimlessly into the Pacific until their bodies turned into dried beef jerky. There were no rescue helicopters. There was no Coast Guard to call when the bamboo started rotting beneath their feet. And yet, they did not just do it once. They did it systematically over thousands of years, establishing highly complex trade networks across islands that shouldn't have been reachable. They traded stone tools, obsidian, and marriage partners across treacherous channels that would make modern professional sailors intensely nervous. They developed an intimate, hyper-detailed psychological relationship with the sea, learning to read the language of the waves like a modern programmer reads lines of code. They understood that a specific type of short, choppy wave meant a reef was near, while a long, slow roll meant deep, endless water. They turned the most hostile environment on Earth into a highway. Why did they leave the safety of the mainland in the first place? Was it because the local wildlife was getting too annoying? Or did someone simply look out at the water and say a primitive version of, bet you won't paddle across that? It was likely a mix of population pressure, depleting resources, and that distinct, slightly unhinged human curiosity that makes us completely unique among mammals. We are a species of cosmic wanderers who cannot tolerate a boundary without trying to smash through it. We saw a watery wall that nature built to keep us contained, and we responded by inventing naval architecture using stone axes and tree bark. When you look at the sheer scale of the Pacific migration, it makes our modern space program look remarkably conservative. We send highly trained astronauts into orbit inside multi-billion-dollar metal pods covered in heat shields and monitored by thousands of geniuses on the ground. Your ancestors sent toddlers and pregnant women into the most violent ocean on Earth on a platform made of giant grass weeds, monitored only by the stars and whatever ancestors they were praying to at the time. It was a multi-generational, slow-motion leap of faith that completely rewrote the biological map of the world. And they did it all without writing down a single blueprint. The entire manual for surviving an oceanic crossing was stored inside the fleshy, vulnerable gray matter of tribal elders who passed it down through spoken stories and rhythmic chants. If a single generation forgot the songs of the stars, the entire collective knowledge of navigation would vanish into the abyss forever. The pressure to remember was absolute. A single lapse in memory meant the death of your entire bloodline. Imagine trying to memorize the entire geography of the Pacific Ocean using only a catchy tune you learned around a campfire. This means every single map we have today is just a lazy graphic representation of the paths your ancestors memorized with their eyes closed. They did not need a piece of paper to tell them where the world ended because they were the ones actively pushing the borders further out into the blue. They were the original architects of globalization, long before anyone invented currency, passports, or duty-free shops. They unified the isolated pockets of the planet using nothing but muscle memory, raw courage, and an absolute refusal to stay where they belong. So, you sit in your modern world, completely insulated from the raw, terrifying elements that shaped your genetic code. You order groceries from an app because walking 3 blocks in the light rain feels like a survival expedition. You complain about the Wi-Fi speed on your transcontinental flight while sipping a lukewarm ginger ale 30,000 feet above the exact same ocean your ancestors conquered on a raft. Your brain has been completely softened by convenience, wrapped in multiple layers of bubble wrap and memory foam to ensure you never have to face the true, unfiltered malice of nature. But underneath that soft, pampered, modern exterior, you still carry the exact same DNA as those wild deep-sea tuna hunters. The same blood that pumped through the veins of the bamboo navigators is currently keeping you alive while you scroll through social media. Your brain still possesses the incredible capacity for pattern recognition that allowed a primitive stickman to read the stars like a GPS map. Today, you look at your phone to find the nearest coffee shop because your internal navigation system is completely broken. You get lost in a multi-story parking garage if the signs are not painted in bright neon letters. Your ancient ancestors navigated thousands of miles of trackless ocean using nothing but their brains and a few pieces of wood. They crossed the deadliest marine barriers on Earth to ensure your survival. Next time you pack your oversized suitcase for a quick beach trip, look out at the water. Remember that your entire existence is the result of a primitive stickman who looked at a terrifying blue void and decided to paddle right through it.